Well, let me just start by saying, Amy, congratulations on your Thinkers 50 once again of, one of the world leaders in management thinking and business thinking.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very grateful for all of it.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. And I also want to say thank you for coming back on my podcast because I spoke to you, I think it was in
Yeah, when was
January,
it? Oh,
Amy.
right. Not so long ago, but
No, it
but
wasn't. It
but
wasn't so
long
long ago.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we were talking about your last book,
Mhm.
and now you've obviously got this wonderful new book, which is awesome because I think when we spoke last, Amy, I talked about I focus a lot on courage. How do we activate courage in ourselves and others? And your work on psychological safety obviously ties in, and
Yes.
but knowing how to
Yes.
fail well is also crucial to that.
It's also about courage. Truthfully, there is failing well really means taking appropriate risks, knowing that not all of them will work out as hoped. And so that's clearly about courage.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to just unpack, a few of the many, many insights in the right kind of wrong. Did I just say that right? Yeah,
Well,
right.
it's right kind of wrong. The science of failing well. I didn't want to use the twice, but it's quite
Okay, right kind of
understandable.
wrong.
And
Yes.
everybody's doing that, saying the right kind of wrong, and it's perfectly fine. I think doesn't right,
The joys of picking book titles.
right, right. Well, it is. Yes, it is, and I think it is. It's a title that is getting some attention in a good way.
Yeah, no, it's really clever. And I think it's interesting. We know that it's so important to risk making mistakes, and we know that failure is a crucial part of the process towards learning and succeeding. And yet, the fear of failure, even though we know not all failures are created equal, still just is so strong in our drivers, still actually holds back so much of the growth and the learning. So, I mean, I would just love to start by if you could just, you say in the book, not all failures are created equal. And I know you unpack the different types of failures. So why don't we just
Yeah,
start there with the different types of
certainly.
failures?
Yeah. So, and this is very important because embracing failure and navigating failure does not mean being sloppy, right? It does not mean taking stupid risks. It doesn't mean mailing it in, right? So the three kinds of failure that I identify in my work are basic failures, which are undesired results that have a single cause, usually human error, but occasionally something just random, like a power outage, for example. And those are largely preventable. We can come back to that. And then there are complex failures, which are the kinds of failures that are created by multiple factors interacting in problematic ways, where any one of those individual factors on its own would not have produced the failure. It's the perfect storm of factors coming together. Both complex failures and basic failures are theoretically preventable, and when we're at our very best, we are able to prevent most of them just by catching and correcting things that
Yeah.
are out of whack. And then the third kind are intelligent failures, and those are the still undesirable results of thoughtful experiments or thoughtful forays into new territory. Those are the kinds of failures that, strictly speaking, cannot be avoided because no one has the playbook in advance. There isn't a recipe. And so the only way to get new knowledge to help you progress on some path is by trying, like by the courageous act of trying something new.
Yeah, and risking at it in the process, which is never a pleasant experience.
No,
But I think what you're trying to do partly in this book is, I'm using my language here, but destigmatize or de-shame failure.
indeed. And, of course, there's some failures that are worthy of stigma and shame. And those are
Mm-hmm.
things that are created by fraud or by
Yep.
outright sabotage. I mean, if someone goes out of their way to, put a wrench in a process just to wreak havoc, that kind of failure will never be acceptable, right? And so those kinds of failures we in fact do want to stigmatize. But here's the problem. Oddly, in many organizations, even though very, very few, like almost no failures are caused by sabotage or other blameworthy acts. In fact, often people feel that their failures are responded to as if they were caused by blameworthy acts, right? So the leadership lesson or need is to help people get the right support they need when things go wrong, either in an experimental context or in another context where they just, in a sense, happen to be the victim of things that are going wrong. They need support, not blame.
Yeah.
They need learning, not shame.
You know, you start this book by sharing early on in your academic journey of your, air quotes I'm doing here, failure.
Yes.
And how much did that inform, the direction you've gone, even with your research over the years, having had that experience? How did that shape and form you, and even illuminate some of your thinking that carries on today?
Well, it was, all researchers experience failures. The failure you're describing, with which I opened the book, was the failure of an early research project that I was leading to get support for the hypothesis, right? So it was like I failed. The data did not behave themselves, at least that they didn't behave themselves in the way that I had hoped they would. So that's a failure. And yes, even today, if I get a research failure, it's disappointing, right? Bordering on, at that time, since it was my first research project, bordering on, terrifying, right? I mean, I just really thought, oh my gosh, I'm gonna fail in my career. That's it, like career over. That's of course silly, but that's how sometimes we think. And so, but that was not, that was not even remotely my first failure. It's not that I'd had many failures. Certainly I was a good student. I tended to do well in school, but I occasionally got in over my head and didn't do well on something. And again, always disappointing. So I think all of that background shaped, my thinking. Like, I mean, I understood the emotional pain of failure, the emotional aversion to failure. And perhaps I also did not have, as a very junior researcher, a new scientist, if you will, I didn't have a language for differentiating the good kind of failure from the not so good. If I had failed to back up my computer and lost all my data, that would be a basic failure. And that would be one in which we really have to try to never do that again. Whereas, articulating a reasonable hypothesis, going out of your way to get the data, running the statistical analyses, and finding out that you didn't support your hypothesis, that's par for the course as a researcher.
Yeah. I think, as you've gone, I mean, you've had a lot of success professionally. As people go through their careers, it's my observation that sometimes people who can be very successful over time can become actually more reticent to risk failure. Even though you might go, look, you're so successful, what do you got to worry about? But actually, the higher they climb, and maybe the more identity and status and sometimes power that they have associated with that success, the more cautious they get, then the less willing they are to risk something where they might have even an intelligent failure. It still can be confronting. So what's your observation with that?
No, it's much like yours, right? It's you on the one hand, it's a little, people have higher psychological safety toward the top and more successful people, which really means that they believe their voice is welcome, but it really means that they believe there will not be problematic consequences for speaking up, with their views, with their observations. But I do believe and do observe that they get more risk averse. Now, Sidney Finkelstein at Dartmouth Tuck School of Business did a remarkable study where he showed that the higher higher level executives, the higher the level in his study, the more executives were attributing causes or factors other than themselves to explain failures, right? So he did a study of failures, and it was this, that the higher up they went, the more, even though they have more power, more influence, more, arguably more control over their own environment, they were less, and I think this is totally related to your question, right? They were less able to either take responsibility or even see and understand that they bore some responsibility.
Yeah.
They were more likely to kind of say this is other people's shortcomings, which is quite interesting, right?
Because it's
wisdom. Yeah.
It's fascinating to me, and I can only think of it in terms of identity, right? And to an extent, ego.
Yeah.
Right. We have a lot invested in our identity as me as a successful person.
Right.
So something that contradicts that, it's like hard to own that and wear that. And hence that, abdicating that, it must be looking for other reasons. So it speaks actually to the need for me when I think about great leaders at senior levels, having humility to admit when they don't know or they got it wrong.
Right. I mean, and maybe as we talk, I'm starting to wonder whether it's not bimodal, right? That on average, what we're describing could be true, but that there are two roads. There's a fork in the road, and some more senior folks, some more successful people actually develop, as you'd expect, the wisdom that they need to kind of be more responsible, be more accountable, be more thoughtful in understanding the bigger picture and the ways in which factors come together, being more aware of how their behavior affects others and creates the conditions where others can take responsibility and take smart risks. And that is, that's the path to wisdom. That's what we would hope success and power would allow you to develop. While another path that is taken is the one we're describing, where the fragility goes up, not down. The worry about being wrong or being caught up short goes high, not low.
Yeah. And I wonder if there's the work, I call it the deep work of leadership and frankly our own humanity, is looking at where it is that our insecurities can sometimes get the better of us. And one would hope that as someone moves into very senior leadership roles, you're able to kind of look at, what are the things that make me insecure, and actually to work through that so that you don't get to a really high level where you have to hide, cover up, and look for reasons why, that others are to blame or other causal factors, versus going, you know what, I missed that, or I got that wrong.
Lighthearted, sort of a lighthearted sense. I made a mistake, right? It's not the end of the world. The world didn't stop spinning on its axis. Which
builds a lot of trust too. When actually you see someone who can own that, you go, I admire them for saying, I got it wrong. Yeah. Or I didn't get it 100% right. I got a lot right, but I missed that bit.
Right. And that's why it's an error, right? Because what you just said is really important, which is when people do that, they don't look weaker, they look stronger, right? They don't look less capable, they look more capable, more confident, more self-aware. And there is a certain sense in which you'll follow them anywhere.
Yeah. And there's a relationship there with vulnerability, because being able to, I know you talk about making friends with failure in your book, but I also think being at peace with our own vulnerability, that we're not always going to get it right. And then being able to own that, like, I got it wrong. I just missed something, or, whatever factor it was. But someone who's able to have that vulnerability to say that versus trying to cover it up, the power and actually the learning too, like the progress that's made, the trust that's built, so much is unlocked from that. But it speaks a lot to, I think, the level of inner work someone has done when they've reached those heights too.
No question. No, I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that you can get to a level of high success or important positions without doing the inner work. But by doing it, it's that you are able to be that much more impactful.
Well, and actually that brings me something. I love the language you used in this, Amy. You talked about tripwires, and I thought I love that word. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that was just
Yeah.
clever. But some of the tripwires that we have, and including that, like round practices for learning from failure. You talked about, just one we can skip past it and say, oh, well, I'll just try harder next time, which maybe having you just repeating the same mistake blinds.
Right.
But you also talked about being overly superficial. And the third one, which is what we're touching on, is not owning how we've contributed to it.
Right.
Is that what you're talking about with tripwires, or is there something else as well?
Well, I think those are tripwire. Tripwire is anything that nature or society or our own egos put in our way, that we might trip over and then be less effective than we had wanted to be or hoped to be. And I think I describe those as sort of the trying to make the point that it's actually not as easy as you would think to learn from failure. It's like we all know, we're supposed to learn from failure. But in fact, it's much easier to kind of skate over the hard work that might imply. And when I say hard, I don't mean lengthy and detailed, but I mean sort of, as you're describing it, honest, forthcoming, right? That willingness to just take a really clear-eyed look at what happened. That's just, let's run the movie. Like, what happened? And then, okay, how did I contribute to what happened? And that might be some things I did that contributed to the failure. That might be things I failed to do, right? The errors of omission that contributed to the failure. Or, I guess in some cases it might be nothing. But people are likely to conclude far more often than is true that I didn't, nothing, not on me, right? I'm clean. Yes and no, right? We're all fallible human beings, and we're all, I guess this is both the blessing and a curse. We're all contributing to the messes that we encounter.
Yeah, no, I had this a few years ago. I was trying to launch this venture with this online TV channel. I didn't really know what I was doing. I engaged someone who promised the moon, and I quickly realized they couldn't deliver. And you know what? I was too, I can use different words here.
Embarrassed or
timid.
Yeah.
I think cowardly could be like, I was just too uncomfortable to raise it and confront it early enough.
Yes.
And I let it go on. And I was just trying to avoid the confrontation. It's like, you actually aren't competent for this. And it was kind of a slow versus a quick one. And I didn't pull the pin earlier and have a very, very hard confrontational exchange.
It gets worse, doesn't it?
It was painful in realizing going, I contributed to this by me not, having the guts to be more direct and have something that was kind of going to be very, very awkward.
I have so many of those.
Drawn out.
Right. And that's a really good example because in a way you're doing all sorts of things that upbringing and cultural norms suggest you should do. You're being nice. You're sort of you're not having this isn't what we're told to do, but you're not having a difficult conversation in a timely way. And the importance of that insight later is these little problems just become bigger problems when we don't address them head on. And many of the failures I write about and many of the failures I've studied were little problems that didn't have to become big problems or didn't have to become failures had they been addressed head on.
And you've written, we've given so many great examples in here, and that's my experience too. And so often, particularly at a scale in a large organization, where a lack of psychological safety, which obviously you've written about extensively in fearless organizations and beyond, but also that coupled with At times when we could act and we could speak or we could intervene, we err towards, that cognitive calculus errs toward silence, playing it safe. And then over time, what's not working just gets worse. And it's much easier to point to others than to say, you know what, I had a role to play in that. I want to just kind of go through now, if you don't mind. You talked about 5 things that sort of define intelligent failure. There was 4 with a cherry on top bonus. Yeah.
Right.
So I have to say, I thought the bonus one was really important.
No question. No question.
I felt like it deserved to just be included in it, but
Yeah, it's just general though. It's in general. So our listeners will see in a moment what we're talking about. So the 4 criteria, if you will, that distinguish intelligent failures from the not so intelligent, or the ones that we really do and can work hard to prevent, are: first, it's in pursuit of an opportunity, right? We're not talking about the kinds of failures where you're just messing about for fun, but there's some goal, whether a life goal, find a life partner, or a work goal, have a fantastic outcome on this project. You are in pursuit of a goal. It's in new territory, meaning there is no playbook. You cannot just find the knowledge you need about how to get a success on the internet. And number 3, you've done your homework, right? You've done enough background work to have a good idea, or a possibility. You have good reason to believe that this could work. So I summarize that as hypothesis driven. You've got a hypothesis. You're not just throwing darts at the wall. And number 4, which is often missed, is that the failure is just big enough to be informative, right? So you are not wasting or otherwise putting at risk resources that you cannot afford to lose. So the intelligent failure is one. It's an experiment that is, that's safe enough. There's nobody going to get, deeply hurt by it unnecessarily. You're not wasting financial or other consequences more than you have to. So opportunity driven, in new territory. You've got a hypothesis, and it's not too big. Finally, the 5th is you learn from it, right? You take the time to learn from it. And I suppose I'd even add to that, and tell your colleagues, right? Because when a colleague engages in the same experiment and also fails that you just did, it's not really intelligent the second time around. So we want to get ahead of that.
Yeah. And I think, in a world where there's so much change and it's moving so fast, I think in an organizational context, yes, you need to obviously be de-risking smart experimentation to what you're talking about, and minimal viable products, so we can be getting it. But how do you not only learn from the failure yourself, but how do you scale that learning rapidly across? And I think about how often in organizations, people they want to actually have no one know about it, or as few people as possible, going, hey, how do we make sure everyone learns from this? I
mean, people aren't going to share it if it's embarrassing or stigmatized, as you said before. So it's a leadership responsibility to share, to help, to have mechanisms to share those kinds of experiments, the results of experiments that end in failure. We need to have a way to get the news out for other people in the same, part of the organization, or doing the same type of job.
So, I recall, probably a decade ago at Microsoft, Satya Nadella talked about, we really wanted to embed this growth mindset across the company. And so that we weren't a company of know-it-alls, but learn-it-alls. And, at meetings, they sort of it was like a protocol of sharing, what have we not succeeded at? What have we failed at? So that we can make sure everyone's getting the value of the learning. I'm curious to know, can you share any other examples of companies you think have just done a really good job, or put in place smart, whether protocols, systems, etc., that help to create more of this intelligent failure?
Well, again, yes. And it's not about creating intelligent failure. It's about creating it's about supporting intelligent risk-taking and recognizing that some of them will fail.
Yes,
because
yes,
it's new territory, right?
I stand
I
corrected.
still, you know, much as I love failure as a topic,
It's not the goal.
I'm still not in, it's not the goal, A, and B, I'm still not in favor of doing them on purpose, right? In a sense,
No,
it's almost an oxymoron. Right?
I think Carol Dweck said that at some point. She said, look, let's just be clear. We're not about failure here, but how do we?
Right. But it's a
yes.
reality, right? It's a reality of life. It's a reality of science. You know, it's a reality of sports. It's a reality of innovation projects. So, right. So, and we were just talking about how do you put in place the structures, as Satya Nadella did when he took over as CEO at Microsoft, to ensure the honest, thoughtful sharing of failures, right? To really spread the word, so that we don't repeat the same ones, but also put in place structures that allow people to have honest, high quality conversations, so that in fact they're taking smart risks. If we go back to the criteria for intelligent failures, it doesn't take too long before we think, wait a minute, I mean, other than finding a life partner, although even maybe that, it doesn't take too long before we realize this is a team sport, right? Because I'm going to miss things that you see and vice versa.
Yeah.
But so if I want to make a smart hypothesis, I probably should run it by you before I execute, right? And I don't mean to delay or take too long or have a committee for everything. But what I am saying is always being mindful that there might be just some critical and quick bit that you're missing. And in especially in novel, uncertain terrain, right? So that the bringing in, having structures, having, you know, at Pixar, they have something called the brain trust of teams that come together while a new film is being made to kind of, in a very organized, structured way, critique it, right? Critique it, which is not easy for people to say, oh, it's a really boring scene, or that doesn't work, or that's sappy, or that doesn't look realistic. All of those things are not nice to say to your friends, but when we build these structures, we can do it. And why do we build these structures? Because we realize, hard as it is, we'd much rather do that in here than out in the marketplace and have them do it for us, right? So you kind of, you screw up the courage and the, you know, the discipline to do this well in-house. Pixar is a good example. I think, you know, Amazon has various structures in place to sort of make their meetings quite systematic. More and more, I am talking about the need for, you know, if we're going to make high quality bets, you know, high quality risks, we got to have high quality conversations. And these are not the norm. And, you know, they're characterized by, yes, psychological safety for people to speak up, share their thinking. These are characterized by people listening really intently to what each other is saying. They're not looking at their phones or doing something else. They're characterized by people explaining their thinking, not just saying, well, I think X, but I think X because I had this experience and here's the data and so forth. And finally, when you're in a high quality conversation, you recognize it as one in where you have a sense that you're learning, you know, you're getting smarter as a process, as a part of being part of it. And then also you feel like you're making progress despite the uncertainty.
Forward, I mean, I think that the quality of our relationships is determined by the quality of the conversations.
Yes.
And yet sometimes the most important ones can be the least comfortable. So I think, you know, whether it's at Pixar, Amazon, you know, these companies that have done a really good job at building the safety and emboldening their loyal dissent.
Right.
You know, we're all on the same team here. And it's actually not just okay for us to disagree, but it's actually expected.
Yes. It's expected because you keep reminding people we live in an uncertain world, complex and, you know, interdependent, and we're probably not right the first time. So let's beat it up until we figure out what's really the best possible next step. Which
to create those environments takes obviously the default, the normal environment, if you're not intervening on it, will be one in which those conversations are not occurring.
Correct.
As a default, people err towards, oh, I won't say anything. So you have to be proactive in terms of the systems and the processes, the meeting protocols. So that how do we really systemize this? Or to your point, how do we institutionalize this so that we're making sure we're getting those different points of view?
Yes, and it can feel a little, I mean, when we start talking about that, I think you said it so well, and listeners could hear that as sort of bureaucratic, and it isn't, right? It's more like, what does an excellent scientific laboratory look like, right? It's disciplined, and but it's full of ideas and energy and critiquing, right? So these are skills, and these are structures that help us practice those skills, and it's not about unnecessary red tape, right? It's about necessary mutual learning.
Well, I think to your point there, the skills are important, the courage is important, but structures can help to foster and facilitate it.
Absolutely. Structure is your friend.
Yeah, when it's just part of a meeting that, hey, we're all going to go around and what's one thing we could be doing better with this idea, improving on it, then it totally makes it safe for people to say, well, I'm wondering. I think that's so important. And I just think of the creativity, the ingenuity, the ideas that can come out of that when, none of us have got a monopoly on wisdom, and other people bring that. So, if you think about, I've for a long time, I've always said, failure is an event, not a person. So I just sort of touch on that, where the tendency, what's your observation? And certainly it's my observation and my experience, how easy it is to over-personalize failure. I am a failure.
Yes.
What's your experience with that? And what have you found helpful to ameliorate against tendency?
Well, I think it's almost second nature, or maybe it's just we're socialized so intently from an early age. But it's almost second nature to jump to that conclusion, right? To go from a failure event to a kind of an awful sense of I'm a failure, right? And because of that, and that, of course, that automaticity is partly responsible for our unwillingness to admit them, to share them, to learn, to dig in and learn as much as we can. But I think it can be stopped, right? That quick conclusion can be stopped in its tracks with skill, with practice, right? It's learning the art of pausing of the unhelpful thoughts, right? So just stop, breathe, challenge. Wait a minute. No, this doesn't mean I'm a failure. I failed here, or this did not work out as I had hoped, right? In fact, going back to the very beginning, where the failure story in my first research project ended up being like the data ended up suggesting something much more interesting than my original hypothesis. And that something, just by the way, was psychological safety. So like if I had succeeded rather than failed, I probably later would have failed rather than succeeded, because I ended up coming up with something that was so much more interesting and important than my original hypothesis. So I'll leave it to readers to read the full story, but we have to just train ourselves to think in healthier ways, right? So I haven't failed. The situation is a failure, right? I'm not red. The situation is red, and train ourselves to be energized and empowered by the opportunity we have to like dig into it and be better tomorrow than we were today, which is Carol Dweck's growth mindset for sure. The idea of the growth, the idea of the fixed mindset is that, gosh, all of the things that happen to me in my job and my life are evidence of sort of who I am, and it's fixed. And the more data I get that I'm kind of failing or things aren't working, then the more evidence I have that I'm not up to snuff. Whereas if I have a growth mindset, I'm thinking, okay, that's data. Sometimes it's inconvenient. Sometimes it's downright devastating. But it's never a full and final sentence about who I am.
Yeah, it's not who I am. It's that failure to achieve something, the outcome I wanted. I remember hearing, it's often quoted Edison, it's like, no, I haven't failed 1,200 times. I've actually found 1,200 ways not to get the
Right.
bulb to glow,
I haven't, he says, I haven't failed. I just found 10,000 ways that didn't work, which is just
that's it.
lovely,
Yeah.
lovely quote. And related, I mean, not exactly related, but related to what we were talking about, the sort of the growth mindset. Buckminster Fuller, another sort of 20th century inventor, said, I seem to be a verb, right? Which was making the point, we think of ourselves as a noun, but we're not, right? We're not a thing here. He says, gosh, every cell in my body wasn't here 7 years ago, but everything, we are a work in progress, I guess is the thing I'm trying to say.
And I think, Amy, I know for me over the years, I grew up in rural Australia and a farm in the bush. And I think growing up probably had very low expectations anyway, what was going to happen with life. So to me, I've embraced almost this mindset of it's all a big adventure. I mean, wow, what would happen if I try? Because, and if I don't succeed, wow, I was an interesting experience. And I think, the more we can wrap, well, that was an interesting experience. Hopefully, even just thinking that about something allowed us to learn from it versus, oh, that was horrendous. I messed up.
Right.
And I know myself, just a friend of mine, Michelle McQuaid, years ago, talked about just pretend you're an experimenter and go, well, this is just a little experiment. I'm playing with this and I'm playing with that. And I know there's can be costs and things, and we've got to minimize.
Right. Well, don't, just as long as they're not any bigger than you can.
Yeah. But it just shifts the mindset from I'm succeeding or failing to, well, I'm learning and I'm coming out of this a little bit more knowledgeable, a little bit wiser, regardless of the result that I got, so it shifts the emotion we have around it, this attachment of I have to succeed at this. This is like, oh, am I going to learn from this?
Our self-talk is very much shapes our emotions and our experience far more than we think, right? We think our self-talk is just factual, right? Like, oh, I failed, or oh, I'm terrible. And that's not, right? That's completely subjective and, by the way, unhelpful, right? So if we can slow it down and sort of say, yes, that was disappointing. I do love that, Buckminster Fuller again, decided at a certain point, he was actually 32 years old, to see his life as an experiment, right? To see as an experiment, a grand experiment, to see what, if anything, an unknown, penniless human being with no particular strength, that's according to him, I would disagree, can do, right? To make a difference for humanity. But that was, so he decided it's just an experiment, right? It's not, I don't succeed or fail, I just will experiment and see what I can do.
Yeah, but how much that liberated his creativity and energy, because I think so often we don't try, to your point that you make so well, we don't try for fear that we will not succeed. And if we can remove or just ameliorate, dampen that fear factor, it just unlocks a whole lot of energy, and all of the things that flow from that. So, well, look, Amy, I just love all of your work. It resonates and feeds into my own thinking all of the time. You've got such great research behind it all too. So, congrats on yet another wonderful book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What a delight to get to talk to you about it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I will just share with you, I'm actually currently working on a new book myself, which is called The Courage Gap, and how to get from where we are to where we want to be, and who we are to who we want to be will always require courage on an individual level, organizational, but even on a societal level for humanity. What's that gap? And
absolutely,
I think knowing how to fail well, the right kind of wrong, is such a facilitator to that, because it unleashes our courage. It helps us tap into it and do the brave thing. But two, when we don't get the result, which is inevitable if we're being brave with our lives, we are inevitably going to to fail at times,
Right.
and to be able to fail forward. I mean, I think so much of your book is helping people to fail forward,
Yes.
and so I'm going to be citing some of your research and work in it as I write this new book too. So
Thank you.